Kabbalistic and historical reading of Daniel's vision in light of 2025. And this is only part one. There's obviously more that I wanted to say, but I knew I was not going to have enough time to complete it. So I just decided that was enough and called it part one. So next week you'll get part two, and maybe the week after you'll get part three. Now, about a month ago, a friend called me and we started talking about the book of Daniel once again. Well, one thing led to another, and I think I'm ready to share most of my recent thoughts on Daniel's chapter 8, the 2300 days, and the significance that has to even this year, 2025. Now, so many things have happened in Israel and to Israel over these past few months, but more and more I have been reading about the red heifer, and now they can be, according to the traditions and the laws, they can be used for sacrifice. They're now of age. My understanding, there's only two out of the five left that is completely pure. And so Israel is in an interesting place. Now, Israel has significantly weakened Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. And President Trump is working on dealing with the Houthis, but he's also laid a heavy charge against Iran that they were not going to have the nuclear weapons. And so he's giving them a chance to negotiate. But I don't think it's going to go very far since they tried this the last time with Barack Obama. Now, my mind began to whir as my friends and I, or my friend and I, were again talking about Daniel 8:14. And I don't know if you can remember, but 8:14 says, "And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Now, 8:14 is it's a fascinating and deeply symbolic verse. It's one of those verses that has multiple meanings and multiple ways of looking at it. In fact, it's viewed differently in Judaism than in Christianity, and there's even some secret traditions that are found in the Kabbalistic understanding, which makes it even more different. Now, tonight, I want to give you a historical look at the verse, but first, I want to share with you a little bit of a history, if you will. Daniel's vision in 8:4 or 8 deals with a ram, a two-horned ram, and a he-goat, and they are clashing over a river. Now, the whole thing is very symbolic as well as historical. The symbolism is, well, the ram with two horns was the Medo-Persian Empire. The one-horned he-goat was the Greek Empire. And by Greek Empire, I specifically mean, because of the one horn, it's dealing with Alexander the Great. Now, later on, there'll be a little horn, commonly referred to as Antiochus IV, who was the Seleucid king who severely oppressed the Jews and desecrated the temple and outlawed many of the Jewish practices. Well, the idea of 2,300 days, which literally is evenings and mornings, is understood to mean to refer simply to 2,300 sacrifices, which would mean about 1,150 days actually, because the daily sacrifice was made both in the morning and the evening. Now, this means that we are talking about a period of a little more than 3 years. So it doesn't fit exactly with any particular time frame in this whole thing, except for maybe the uh, temple was off limits for 300 or for 3 years. Now, this time frame speaks of the desecration of the temple in Jerusalem by Antiochus and its subsequent cleansing and rededication. Now, this defeat of Antiochus is celebrated by the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. And as I said earlier, there are many ways to look at this verse. Now, most Jewish commentators like Rashi and Ibn Ezra and others would simply say what we're looking at is the defilement of the Second Temple by Antiochus, with culminating with the Maccabeans retaking the temple and removing the strange sacrifices that were made there. Actually, it would be a cleansing and a reconstruction or reconsecration of the temple itself. Christianity would look at this thing multiple ways. The Pretists, I don't know if you know who they are. They're like the Jews. They see this prophetic verse as dealing with Antiochus and the Maccabean revolt. They do deal eschatologically, but at the same point in time, they never saw it past the first century. And so that was one view that you have. If you go to the second view that they had, they just simply said it's historical. It's just 2,300 days, and it's often linked to a church period of time that they would simply call corruption, and it was a cleansing that happened afterwards. In fact, most of the time they speak of it as the Protestant Reformation. Now, the Seventh-day Adventists had another interpretation, which is different, and so that's why I want to at least share it with you. They came to the conclusion that the 2,300 days were literally not days, but years. And it began in the year 457 BC with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. And it ended in 1844. Now, the reason it ended in 1844 is they believe this marks the beginning of the heavenly judgment and the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary, not our earthly one. Now, personally, I find the Christian thoughts are, well, far short, with no good beginning and no good end. And it's at this point I want to leave the traditional paths and follow a mystical or a more Kabbalistic path. For them, the 2,300 days can be understood as a number representing a process of purification, a process of judgment, a process of cosmic cycles. The sanctuary, which they refer to as Kodesh, may be interpreted not just as a physical temple, but metaphorically, or as the inner temple within us. It's our soul, or even the cosmic order disrupted by impurities, starting with the chaos in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where it talks about the earth became tohu, formless and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. But there's another unique opinion which holds that these 2,300 days are actually years and mark the time beginning with the defeat of Artaxerxes, who was also Darius, who was the son of Esther, who was a Persian emperor at the time. He was defeated at the Battle of Issus, which took place in 333 BCE by Alexander the Great. Now, if you start at 333 BC and you add 2,300 days or years to that, you mathematically end up at 1967. If you remember your history, 1967 was the year of the Civil War, the 6-Day War. Now, can you think of a dramatic event more dramatic than the 6-Day War, when the Jewish army recaptured not only the city of Jerusalem, but almost all the land that was necessary in order to create what we called Israel? Now, this occurred in 1967, occurred as the last week of Daniel 9's 69th week. Now, not to spend all my time teaching that, you can go back to the book of Daniel and my lessons that I have stored away on the NETIV website and look for the 69th week or chapter 9. and chapter 10, where you can get a better understanding. So Yom Kippur War, which happened 7 years later on October 6th to 25th in 1972, was at the end of the very first week of the sabbatical week of Daniel's 70th week. Now, as I shared earlier, when I taught Daniel's 70 weeks, the last day of that 70th week was October 6th, 2023. And you can actually find a map that I displayed to try to help you understand what was going on. Now, the day Hamas broke out of Gaza and slaughtered some 1,200 Jews and took 250 hostages, that was on the seventh day, the final day of the celebration of Sukkot, which is the beginning of the new year. So 2,300 days, Daniel 8:14. What is it telling me, or what's causing me to reflect on this again? Well, historically, we were talking about it, so I began to think about the Maccabean War, and I thought about Hanukkah. Now, theologically, it symbolizes purification after desecration. Mystically, it could present a restoration of divine order in the microcosm. Well, the microcosm would be your soul, or a macrocosm, which would be the cosmos altogether. Now, prophetically, we can read it as a signal of a larger eschatological event, which would be the end of Daniel's 70 weeks and the end of the time of the Gentiles. That's what I think marks the day, the 7th. But I want to go further. I think there was more to Daniel 8:14 than we know about. I want you to think about this, and you don't have to get your Bible out, but Daniel 8:17 reads, "Understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision." So in other words, this angel is telling him the time wasn't then, the time is at the end. In the 19th verse, he goes on to say, "I will make thee know what shall be in the end, or in the last end of the indignation. For at that time, the appointed time is the appointed time of the end, it shall be." So these verses imply that there's really a two-tier prophecy here. Maybe the first one dealing with Antiochus the Fourth and Hanukkah. But at the end, it deals with the end of days. Now, I find that fascinating, and it triggered other thoughts. But God left us an earlier hint regarding the time we're living in right now. The Kabbalist understood that each sentence in the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, hints at a chronological year. Each verse, or I should say, each sentence, creates a idea of a year. Because sometimes in the writings, a verse splits a sentence into pieces, and so the rabbis went back and counted their way through it. So that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. So let me try to share with you a little insight into what I mean. In the modern times, the worst events occurred in Jewish history just might have occurred prior to the gaining of independence and the homeland in 1948 with the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust began in 1937-38. And the event that seemed to trigger this Holocaust was Kristall Night, which is the night of the broken glass. And it was, in essence, Hitler's declaration of war against the Germans and the Austrian Jews. And it implicitly speaks about Jews living anywhere, not just in Germany, not just in Austria. So across Germany and across the annexed Austria on 9-10 November, the Jews staged a spectacular vengeance and desecrated and degraded a great number of Jewish communities, in some cases even emptying them out. Now, the pretext for Crystal Night did not take place in Germany. It was an assassination in Paris of a German diplomat. The diplomat was Ernst von Roth, someone virtually the world knew nothing about before November 30th, November and 38. But it supplied an excuse to Adolf that he chose to take advantage of. Now, the assassin was a 17-year-old. His name was Grisben. He's a Polish Jew who lived in the French capital of Paris. And he was not with his family. In fact, he had been separated for almost 2 years, but financially, he barely kept his head above the water. And his decision to kill a German official had precious little to do with his tenuous circumstances in Paris. Rather, it was about the despair that he had built up over the situation of his family, who were still stranded in Poland and Germany. Kabbalists understand that every sentence, not necessarily every verse, represents a year in terms of creation. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 24 or chapter 29, verse 28, we read the following: "The hidden things belong to the Lord our God." Now, several months ago, during Hanukkah season, I shared with you that 2025 seemed to hint at something special. But until it happens, it's going to remain a mystery. Now, there's one parsha that is totally unique in its summary. Every parsha tells you how many verses are in it. But the parsha called Miketz, which means at the end, gives you not only a number of verses, but it also gives you a word count. When it gives you the word count, it actually tells us that there were 2,025 words in the text. Now, it's the only parsha that does that. So the question that came to my mind, which started me a few months ago, was the fact that obviously there has to be some meaning to this. Otherwise, why would God have put it in? Well, now in most years, Maketz is read during or around Hanukkah. Now, the Vilna Gaon said that the candle lighting was a hint to something special. Well, Hanukkah literally means rededication. It's an 8-day festival beginning on the 25th of Kislev and going to the 1st of Tevet, in which they celebrate the Maccabeans' capture of the temple and the Syrian Greeks' defeat, as well as the rededication of the temple and the kindling of the lights of Hanukkah. Now, on the last day of Hanukkah this year, something special happened. You see, this year, the last day of Hanukkah happened on January 1st, the beginning of the Gentile year. Now, the word candle in Hebrew is the word ner, 2 letters, nun, resh. Nun has a value of 50. Resh has a value of 200, which means we have 250 total. And on the last day that they light 2 candles, which means 250 times 8 candles, or 2,000. Now, as I shared earlier, Hanukkah begins on the 25th of Kislev. So the question is, and by the way, Hanukkah will happen again this year. December 17th, I think, is when it starts. But the 25th, so you take 25 and add it to the 2,000, you have 2,025, which is a cute math problem which occurs only during the season. Now, against all odds, a small band of faithful but poorly armed Jews led by Judah of Maccabees defeated the mightiest army in the world at that point in time. driving the Greeks from the land and reclaiming the holy mountain. The Parsha reads most often during, this Parsha is read most often during Maketz. But when you read Maketz, one of the things you find is it deals with the reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers. Since October 8th, I've been watching what's going on across the area campuses and much of the world where groups are marching for Palestinian success. But not in Israel. Not in many of those marches, Jews are even seen marching with the protesters against Israel. What factors will bring the tribes together again if they're now still marching against one another? Well, we know in Israel there seems to be a great spiritual revival. The Torah is becoming more and more common. Jews are going back to their history and understanding. Now, what I find interesting is that Joseph was the reuniter with his brothers 2 years after Pharaoh's dream, according to Genesis 41:1. Okay, 2 years after. We're approximately 2 years after October 7th. Is a Joseph going to arise soon? Also, there's a kid game that comes out at Hanukkah. Now it's a spinning game using a dreidel. Now the dreidel in Europe and the dreidel in the United States has 4 letters on it: Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Pei or Fei, whichever way you want to put it. And according to the Jewish understanding, it's an anagram. And the anagram says a great miracle happened there. There being Jerusalem, I'm sure. Now, the value of those letters, the Nun, the Gimel, the Hey, and the Pei, is 138. Did you know that 138 is often associated with Hanukkah and with the Hebrew name Tzemach? Tzemach is another name for the Messiah. Now, if you're spinning a dreidel in Israel, you have 4 letters: Nun, Gimel, Hey, but the 4th letter is a Shin. If you add those together, you get 358. And again, the phrase that's there becomes a great miracle happened here, not there, happened here. And the value of 358 is the word Mashiach. Hanukkah is about restoring or rededicating the people to serving the divine light. But why would the Hamash associate Maketz with a secular year, a secular calendar? Well, we understand every nation has their own calendar, but there's a common calendar that's also used, because when we celebrated the year 2000 here in the United States, we watched on television all of the nations celebrating it. So the Gregorian calendar was used across the world and has some part in every place across the world. Now, again, Deuteronomy 28 or 29:28, the hidden things belong to the Lord our God. Now, how many of these secrets were revealed when Moshe de Leon first published the book, or the books called the Zohar? Now, he did it in the year 5050, Anno Mundi, or the year of the world. In the United States and on the Gregorian calendar, that would have been 1290. So what's going on? The Zohar is the foundational work of the Kabbalistic literature. For those that are unfamiliar with the Zohar, please understand that it is really a composite of some 25 or 21 or more books and manuscripts that were assembled under one title, according to the Vilna Gaon. Actually, it started out with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in the 2nd century, who is said to have brought these thoughts or ideas into reality, according to the Talmud in Hagigah 2:1. Now, the word Zohar is only used once in the entire set of scriptures, and that's in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8, verse 2. There it says, I saw, and behold, a likeness in the appearance of fire, from the appearance of its loins and below fire, and from its loins and up like an appearance of Zohar, or splendor, like the color of Hashmal, which is an amber color. Hashmal is also the word in Hebrew that's used for electricity, a vibration, if you will. Now, according to Gershom Scholem, the Zohar is really divided into 21 types of content. The first 118 are the works of the original author, Moshe de Leon. But the final 3 are the works of later imitators who write in that same style. Now, the Zohar, which includes commentaries on the mystical aspects of the Torah and the scriptural interpretations, as well as the material on mysticism, mythical cosmology, mystical psychology. The Zohar contains discussions of the nature of God, the origin and destruction of the universe, the nature of souls, redemption, the relationship of ego to darkness, and true self to the light of God. Now, you might be wondering why it took until 1290 before it was recorded. Before 1290, the tales were simply passed down, not written in Hebrew, but spoken in Aramaic. These different texts were not called parshas at that time. They all had their own titles. Some like Reah Mahima, which happens to be the faithful shepherd, or the hidden Torah, or another one was the Tukune Zohar, which is dealing with the garments of radiance. That book gives you 70 possible mystical understandings of just the first word. Now, and some 30 years later, other articles were found and later added to this, but those were the basic ones. Now, in Tukune Zohar, the 4th page B, we read the final redemption was tied to the level of Emet. So understand that the end will come with truth. Now, this comes from, or the Zohar tells us it comes from Micah 7:20, where it says, give truth to Jacob, which is, again, an acronym. Emet actually forms the words Aleph, Matayim, Tishmim. And when you add up the value of the letters, you get 550. Anno Mundi. So the Hebrew calendar, Moshe de Leon decided that it was fit to publish on 1290, based upon the value of 3 words. Now, the Hebrew year 5050 hints at a Hebrew revelation of what is known as the 50 gates of understanding. So let's add some significance to the year 1290 or 5050, depending on how you want to look at it. But I want to start with Psalms 67, verse 3. That your way should be known on the earth. That your way should be known on the earth. Now, the gematria of Eretz is Aleph, which is read, could be either a 1 or 1,000. Resh is 200, and Sadi is 90. So in the earth time, we're talking about 1290, which is said to fulfill what is written in the written. Now, in Psalms 84:12, where the truths will sprout from the earth and the earth here is called Ma'aretz. Now, can you see the connection between 1290, the year of the Zohar was first published, and the year, and how it hints at understanding? There's overlap here with Hanukkah. You see the last flame with the first moment, the last flame flickered on January 1st, 2025. Now, it makes a symbolic bridge between the lighting of the candles at the beginning on the Kislev 25 and at the end in Tevet 1, which is the new year for the Gentiles. It's like passing a torch from a spiritual resilience from Jewish tradition to the hope and possible new year. Now imagine ending a difficult year lighting a small candle of hope whose flame carries you into a fresh chapter, one lit by the same spark. That moment could be seen. You see, we're looking at the merging of calendars, sacred ones and celestial ones. Now, this, or secular, I should say. The cosmic reminder that light and renewal transcend boundaries. The potential messianic signal to mystics who view dates and alignments as spiritual charge. So let me add one more element to my thinking. I want to talk about the Chinese New Year, because we are now in the year of the snake. The snake is a wood snake, because China has a wood and a water snake. But this year, it's the wood snake. Now, it began not on January 1, but on January 29. And astrologically, the snake symbolizes wisdom, intuition, transformation, and sometimes hidden danger or cunning. Now, as a metaphor, the snake sheds its skin, which is a powerful symbol of rebirth and renewal. Here's where it gets real mystical. Light plus snake equals illumination of the hidden. Hanukkah represents light in the darkness. The snake represents mystery or the hidden or the esoteric. And together, it could suggest an uncovering of some deep mystical truths in 2025. Now, regarding transformation, Hanukkah means rededication. The word new year is a fresh start. The snake shedding its old self, and all signs point to 2025 being this transitional year according to the Kabbalists. Biblical and mystical overtones. In Kabbalah, the Nahash serpent is both a symbol of evil plus potential divine wisdom, only when it's elevated. Now, on the surface, the serpent caused Adam and Eve's fall, representing temptation, ego, disconnection from divine unity. But the serpent is also the carrier of divine wisdom, just as hidden or misused. In the end, we will read about the serpent again, not like we saw in Genesis where he brought down Adam and Eve, but we will find him bringing up, enlightening, passing divine wisdom. Most of you already know that the Hebrew word for Nahash, which means serpent, shares the root with another word, divination, and another word, inquination or intuition. Now, the snake doesn't just deceive, it invites transformation. It causes a fall so that we may rise higher. The lighting of last Hanukkah candle into this year of the snake could imply that a spiritual challenge to uplift was dark the actions of Adam and the serpent in the garden, only to be redeemed at the end. So my question to myself was, is this a coincidence? Now, the convergence of all the elements, the Jewish light, the Gregorian renewal, the symbolism of the transformation, could be interpreted as a cosmic alignment, calling humanity to wake up, shed old patterns, and to step into a wiser, more spiritually lit age. Now, in Kabbalah, the Nahash is not just the villain, as I said, not just the villain. You see, we've disconnected him from divine unity, just as he disconnected Adam and Eve. But deeper, the serpent is also the carrier of divine wisdom and just hidden or misused. Again, the snake doesn't deceive, it invites transformation. It causes a fall so that we might rise up higher, according to the Kabbalist. Now, the Zohar teaches that evil, like the Nahash, is really a shell, or what they call a klipa, that surrounds or conceals holy sparks. So we can't see them, but they're there. Now, these, according to the mystic, has to be redeemed or extracted. And that process is called birbur. And so in 2025, entering the year of the snake isn't necessarily bad. It could be a cosmic call to evaluate or elevate the hidden sparks within the deception, the ego, the fall in wisdom. Hanukkah is deeply Kabbalistic. The 8 nights symbolize the Sephirot above nature. This is a Kabbalist chart. It's called the chart of tree of life. There are 10 plus 1, 10 Sephirot. Now, if we go back to this, we know that there are 7 days in the week, the 7 natural. But the week of Hanukkah is 8, which talks about a transcendence. It's beyond the 7-day week. Lighting candles pushes back spiritual darkness, and the holiday is, well, it's about purifying the temple. And in our case, the temple is us. So if Hanukkah ends as 2025 begins, it's like the final sparks of purification are carried into this deep inner work, shedding the skin of the snake. Now, Kabbalists often look at calendar overlaps to understand divine timing. Now, the Hebrew calendar is based on the moon and the sun, and it blends physical cycles with spiritual ones. Events like Hanukkah don't just happen at random. They mirror some sort of spiritual energy. Now, the Gregorian calendar, though secular, marks quite a collective conscious reset. When it lines up with the holy time, like the last day of Hanukkah and the first day of January, we seem to amplify energy. Now, the Chinese zodiac, and in this case, the year of the snake, while not part of the Jewish tradition in Kabbalistic universalism, the idea is that there is every every culture's wisdom contains echoes of some sort of divine truth. The snake is intuition, wisdom, rebirth, fits in, and the Kabbalistic idea of the Nahash is the idea of redemption. In recent years, there have been whispers, scientific and non-scientific, of the necessity to change the horoscope chart. You see, the horoscope is based on 12, but there's a 13th sign of the zodiac, which also falls on the ecliptic. It's the idea of the equinox. Earth's axis changes very slowly over time, meaning that the constellations which are visible in the night sky, well, they have to change too. Now, the astronomical signs today are based on 12 major constellations that line up on with the sun, and they are said to rule for about a month in time, or each one for about a month. Now, the argument is that due to the precession of the equinox, a 13th constellation has now crept into this. Now, the majority of astrologers reject the idea, mainly because astrology isn't really based on stars, but on fixed vernal equinoxes, which no longer exist. And they're also based upon personal understanding. Now, the same is true in traditional Jewish thought, where each sign corresponds to a month on the Hebrew calendar, as well as to one of the 12 tribes. So 12 and 12 makes perfect sense. Now, having this 13th month on the Jewish and apply it to the Jewish system really isn't a problem at all. In fact, it's the solution. You see, since the Jewish calendar has a 13th month or a leap month every 2 or 3 years, this extra month then would have a sign that goes over it. Now, there's been two ways in which they've looked at it. One is the idea that the 13th month could be Levi, because you see, Levi doesn't have any land. He simply is part of it. Others say no, Joseph counts as two now. We'll separate them and make Ephraim one and Manasseh the other. Now, whatever the case, whether the horoscope requires modification or not, that's not really relevant to Judaism, which denies any astrological effect on Israel. Besides, unlike the astrologers or the astronomers, both ancient and modern have always been aware of this 13th constellation and how close it is to the ecliptic. To the ancient Babylonians, it was the snake-like Nera. To the Greeks, it was known as Ophiuchus, who was a very interesting constellation because you see they call it the serpent bearer. This constellation is in the shape of a man firmly grasping onto a twisting snake. This is, of course, the very symbol of Mashiach, that serpentine savior who defeats the primordial snake in all of its evil. And after being an astrological footnote for a very long time, Ophiuchus is now entering into the spotlight. It's becoming harder and harder to deal with. Now, Ophiuchus really, well, there's something fascinating about it and him. But let's talk first about leap years, and let's talk about Ophiuchus when he appears. He appears within an 11-year cycle. So if we take the first one and at the last one, we come up with something very interesting. You see, in 1989, the constellation was in the sky on the ecliptic, 1989, which is 5750 on our on the Hebrew calendar. Do you remember when they first put the book of the Zohar out? Was on 5050. 250 years later, in 1989, the cosmic clock lines up. Now, according to the Genome Project, which is, again, another topics for later, it predicted the next time it would be there would be 2001. Well, what happened in 1989? Tiananmen Square. What happened in 2001? 9/11 in America. Now we have two events that fall on the line of the snake. One which is dealing with China, and one which deals with the United States. We're now again at this point. So the question comes, what's going to happen this month or this year? What are we looking at? Let me, I have so much more to share that, like I said, I'm going to break it into 2, maybe even 3 parts. Next time, I want to really get into understanding 2025 because it has a great deal of biblical significance. And I also want to work into the future. I want to give you the Kabbalistic understanding of the end of days, which I've been working on for years, trying to get it put together. And I at least have a feeling that I can give you some more understanding and more answers than you probably have. But again, I've talked for almost 50 minutes now, so let me end it now, and I'll start again next time, but I'll give you a warm up or introduction to where we're at. But anyway, thank you for listening to me. I hope you subscribe to NETIV so you can hear not only me, but you can hear a lot of great speakers, rabbis, and oh yeah, my boss, Rod Bryant, he's there too. But anyway, shalom. And now we'll go for questions.